So I want to bring in Faz Shakir, advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders and the executive director of More Perfect Union, and Brendan Buck, former press secretary to House Speaker Boehner and Ryan. He is an MSNBC political analyst. And so maybe we talk a little bit about the House Speaker. And I'm just wondering, Brendan, what you take away as this moment for Speaker Johnson?
Well, obviously a huge day for him, and credit to him for getting this over the finish line. This is, I think, the fourth time where they've gone to the floor on big votes, whether it was the Speaker vote for him or the bill to fund the government earlier, or the first time they had to pass a budget, and they didn't know they had the votes, and they went to the floor, and that's a pretty risky gamble, and they pulled it off every time. So credit to him for getting to this point and having the budget step behind them. At the same time, they haven't really solved any of their problems. They have a huge gulf between the House and the Senate on levels of spending, and I know that they've spent the last few days trying to smooth that over with conservatives. But sort of talking about it through rhetoric is very different than when that gets put on paper and people actually see what they're looking to cut. I couldn't help but catch the Speaker spent a lot of time talking about how they're not going to cut Medicaid, and then he was asked for a single example of what they're going to do, and he had to go immediately to Medicaid, because that is the largest pool that they can work from. And you can talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, and there certainly is that in Medicaid, but making that go away and writing into law something that is going to root that out is not quite so simple. So soon they'll be needing to put some things on paper. You'll need to people will have a better understanding of what the impact will be on certain programs. And it may be the case that some of these numbers aren't quite as high as some of the conservatives want. So a big day for him, but I think we're still a very long way from having resolution on some of these vexing issues that I don't even know they've even really started to try to fix.
And Brendan, real quickly, a budget resolution that was adopted is essentially an outline or blueprint. There is no real detail in this.
Oh, that's right. And the House and the Senate put two different outlines, and I think that's what a lot of conservatives were about. The House put pretty aggressive targets that they said these committees need to hit in terms of spending cuts. For example, $880 billion out of the committee that oversees Medicaid. On the other hand, the Senate has set themselves up with very low targets, and that's the frustration from a lot of conservatives. The Senate has basically said anything will go. They've set the targets so low. The problem for conservatives, the Senate instructions, the Senate targets are the only ones that really matter under the procedure we use in the House. So you've got a lot of conservatives saying, I don't trust that the Senate is actually going to come through with the level of spending cuts that we want. And you saw Thune and Johnson come together today and try to give those assurances. But there's a simple reality that the level of spending cuts the House is demanding are just not going to fly with a lot of senators. And when that final bill comes back from the Senate, or at least through a negotiation, and it's nowhere near as aggressive on Medicaid, for example, you're going to have a serious vote problem at some point. I'm not saying they won't get there. I think they're going to have to figure this out. This is one of those must-do things, and so they will get it done somehow. But those targets there's a huge gulf between those targets, and I think conservatives are going to be very troubled when they see what the Senate is able to swallow.
Yeah, and Faz, you're just thinking about the Speaker saying essentially elections matter, and that the Republicans were given the House, the Senate, and the White House, but it's just in the Senate, Faz, it seems as though there will be some differences and some substantial differences. How do you see that?
Well, you just take Medicaid, and agreeing with everything that Bren was laying out about the math, high level of deception there from Speaker Johnson about the math that would be required to cut that much in Medicaid. In his own district, you have well more than a third, something like 34% of people on Medicaid. There's other Republican districts. Yeah, Senator Sanders is going to Bakersfield, California this weekend. That's David Valadeo's district. 67% of those folks are on Medicaid. And, you heard Speaker Johnson say something like, well, these are kids who are on video games, and you get out of the basement. And like, if you look at the people in his own district and in California, these are people working at McDonald's, working at Walmart, working at Tesla. If you look at the stats in California, in the Central Valley, there are a couple thousand of people who are working at Tesla, owned by the richest person in the world, on Medicaid. And these are the people who they want to cut health care from. So I think it's going to be very, very challenging. It should get very, very challenging for them. There is a populist revolt going on in this nation. We're going to do everything we can to metastasize the fight and defeat Speaker Johnson's efforts.
And so, you know, the Speaker, I think twice said, we're not going to touch essential elements of any of these social programs. And Faz, I want to just get your thoughts real quick on the issue of the tariffs. You know, I mean, hasn't part of the Democratic platform for years been supportive of tariffs? I mean, what should Democrats now be saying?
Yeah, I mean, you know, President Biden executed tariffs for purposeful intent, targeted tariff to say we want to create jobs in certain sectors, electric vehicles, solar panels, chips production. And they had strategic design. They said, hey, I want to build these jobs in America. When Trump came along, he says, I'm going to wield this baseball bat and wreck the economy. Blanket tariffs all across the board with no strategic design or purpose or intent. In fact, when you look at the arguments he's making, you say, oh, it's for fentanyl, it's for illegal immigration, it's for external revenue service, it's for trade imbalance, it's for all kinds of purpose and creating jobs. Like, no, it can't be all of those things. What strategic design or purpose do you have? And as we saw from these numbers, there is no. They've literally come out with numbers that don't make any sense to anybody. But to your point, Jose, you look at when President Biden was in charge, we had targeted tariffs that work. They can be utilized effectively and help grow jobs in America. But Donald Trump is certainly showing the way about how to do them ineffectively.